Kate shouldn't have taken the dare, but she couldn't stand being called a coward. So here she was, alone, walking down Dead Man's Trail on Halloween night. It was dark, darker than she expected. The trees pressed in on all sides, their branches twisted like claws. The wind was still, the air cold, and the only sound was the crunch of dead leaves beneath her boots. Dead Man's Trail wasn't just a name. Everyone knew what had happened here, how they'd found the bodies years ago. Slashed, mutilated, left to rot. They said the murderer was the butcher of Black Hollow. He'd been caught eventually, strung up from the tallest tree in these very woods. But some people swore they could still hear him at night, wandering the woods, looking for more. She tried to shake the thought from her head. It was just an old story, something to scare kids. But as she moved deeper into the woods, her breath quickened. The trees seemed to close in tighter, the shadows darker. She checked her phone, no signal. Typical. A sound broke the silence behind her, a low snap of a branch. Kate stopped dead in her tracks, heart thudding. Slowly, she turned, her flashlight beam cutting through the fog. Nothing. Just trees and darkness. She let out a shaky breath and turned back to the path. But then she saw it. A boot, lying in the middle of the trail, dirty and torn. It was half buried in the leaves, like it had been there for years. Kate's pulse quickened. She took a cautious step forward and froze. The boot wasn't alone. Next to it was a pile of bones, scattered haphazardly, some of them broken, split in ways that made her stomach twist. They were human. There was no mistaking it now. Her throat tightened as she stepped back. The stories, maybe they weren't just stories. Suddenly, from somewhere deep in the fog, she heard it, thud, drag, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps moving through the underbrush. Kate's heart raced. She spun around, trying to see where it was coming from, but the fog was too thick. The sound grew louder, closer. She could hear breathing now, ragged and wet, like someone, or something, struggling to draw air. And then, through the mist, she saw him. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in filthy, blood-stained rags. His skin was pale, stretched tight over his skull, and his eyes, hollow, empty. In one hand, he held a rusted cleaver, the blade still dripping dark, wet stains. He moved slowly, deliberately, dragging one foot behind the other, his gaze locked on her. The butcher. Kate's blood ran cold. He wasn't supposed to be real. He was dead, had been for years. But here he was, standing just feet away, staring at her with a twisted grin. "I'm not done yet," he rasped, his voice cracked and guttural, like it hadn't been used in a long time. Panic shot through her. She turned and ran, her feet pounding against the trail as she crashed through the underbrush. The fog seemed to swallow her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Behind her, the footsteps followed, thud, drag, always just a little too close. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but the sound never faded. He was still there, moving slowly but steadily, the cleaver glinting in the moonlight. No matter how fast she ran, he was getting closer. Kate's foot caught on something, and she stumbled, falling hard into the dirt. She scrambled to her feet, pain shooting through her ankle. But before she could run again, the air around her went still. Cold. Wrong. She turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. The butcher stood just a few feet away, his dead eyes gleaming in the fog, the cleaver raised high above his head. His grin stretched impossibly wide, revealing broken, yellowed teeth. He whispered again, this time even softer, like a secret meant only for her. "More." The cleaver came down.